What if I told you one of the biggest comeback stories in hip-hop just turned into one of the most self-destructive cases the federal system has seen in years? We're talking about a man who walked out of prison in October 2025 with everything lined up: fame, money, industry support, and a second chance most people never get. The spotlight was back on him. The fans were ready. The industry was watching. All he had to do was stay out of trouble. But instead, just months later, the FBI kicks in doors, and suddenly he's back in federal custody, not alone, but sitting next to his own father. And what the federal documents reveal? It's not just messy, it's calculated. Allegedly, this wasn't some random argument gone wrong. This was a setup. A fake business meeting. Multiple people. Multiple cities. A plan that prosecutors say was organized down to the minute. A meeting that was never meant to be a meeting. And here's where it gets even crazier. The same man trying to escape his contract allegedly forced his own label boss to sign paperwork at gunpoint. Not rumors. Not internet gossip. We're talking about a federal case packed with evidence that's raising one brutal question. How do you go from a second chance to potentially life in prison in less than 90 days? And the deeper you go into this story, the worse it gets. Because this isn't just about one decision. It's about mindset, loyalty, family, and a trail of evidence that might have told on everyone involved before anyone even had the chance to speak. Let's break this all the way down. Right after that moment, everything starts to unfold in a way that feels less like real life and more like a movie that keeps getting darker with every scene. Because once you step past the surface of the story, one thing becomes crystal clear. This wasn't random. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't something that spiraled out of control in the heat of the moment. According to federal prosecutors, this was planned. And that changes everything. Let's go back to January 10th, 2026, the day this entire situation allegedly went from business to something far more serious. 3 industry figures board a flight and head to Dallas. Nothing unusual about that. In the music business, meetings happen every day. Artists renegotiate deals, labels restructure contracts, money moves, paperwork gets signed. So when these men landed, they had no reason to think anything was off. They were told there would be a meeting at a studio. A normal sit-down. A conversation. But what they walked into was something completely different. When they arrived at the studio, it wasn't even open yet. That alone didn't raise red flags. Happens all the time. So they waited. Grabbed drinks. Killed time. Relaxed. That's what makes this part so chilling. They were comfortable. They felt safe. And according to the timeline, everything changed in a matter of minutes. Because while they were sitting there thinking this was business, multiple people were already on the way. Not 1 or 2. 9. And that number matters. 9 people doesn't happen by accident. That takes coordination. That takes communication. That takes planning. You don't just randomly gather that many individuals from different locations unless there's a clear objective. Prosecutors say some of them even traveled from another city. Think about that for a second. Driving hours, just to show up at a studio at the exact same time. That's not coincidence. That's a setup. Now here's where things take an even sharper turn, because the same person who allegedly arranged this meeting is also the one prosecutors are calling the ringleader. The one who set the location. The one who made the call. The one who built the entire situation. And if that's true, then this wasn't just about a disagreement. This was about control. This was about forcing an outcome. And when the group finally entered that studio, the tone changed instantly. The victims were separated. Right away. No discussion. No negotiation. No easing into it. Separated. And in situations like that, separation is everything because it removes support, creates fear, and gives control to whoever is running the operation. One group was taken into the recording room. The others were held somewhere else. Now imagine the confusion at that moment. You walk in expecting a conversation, and suddenly you're being moved, directed, isolated. That's when reality starts to hit. Something isn't right. And then, according to the complaint, the real purpose of the meeting was revealed. Paperwork came out. Not casual paperwork. Contract paperwork. Termination documents. And that's the moment where everything crosses a line, because now it's not just about presence, it's about pressure. Sign this. And this. Make it official. But here's the problem: consent matters. And when someone refuses, that's when situations either de-escalate or explode. In this case, prosecutors say it escalated instantly. Because when the paperwork was rejected, the tone shifted from pressure to force. And this is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. A weapon was allegedly introduced. Not subtle, not hidden, visible, direct, and pointed. At that point, the entire situation changes from negotiation to coercion. There's no more discussion, no more back and forth, just compliance. And under those circumstances, what choice does anyone really have? That's the question at the center of this case. Because legally, anything signed under that kind of pressure doesn't carry the same weight. But in that moment, survival becomes the priority. Not contracts, not business, just getting out. And what makes this even more intense is how structured everything allegedly was. This wasn't chaos. This was organized. One person handling the pressure, another reviewing documents, someone else recording, others controlling the environment. Everyone had a role. That's what prosecutors are pointing to, not just what happened, but how it happened. Because when actions look coordinated, it strengthens the argument that this wasn't spontaneous. It was intentional. And while all of that was happening in one room, something else was happening in another. The other victims, still being held, still under control. And according to reports, this is where things got physical. Not just threats, actual force. Which takes the situation even further, because now you're not just dealing with intimidation, you're dealing with violence. And once violence enters the equation, everything escalates legally. Fast. Because now you're looking at multiple layers: conspiracy, robbery, possible kidnapping. And each one of those carries serious weight on its own. Combine them, you're looking at something much bigger. Now here's the part that really stands out: what happened after. Because once everything was done, the group didn't stay. They left. Quickly. Which suggests timing mattered. They knew how long they wanted to be there. They knew when to move. And that again points back to planning. But what they didn't account for was what came next. Because in today's world, nothing happens in isolation. Every move leaves a trace. Every step leaves data. Every action connects to something. And that's where this case starts to shift from shocking to almost unbelievable. Because the same level of planning that allegedly went into the situation was matched by something else entirely. Evidence. And not just one piece. A trail. And once that trail starts forming, it becomes very hard to control the narrative. Because now it's not just about what people say happened, it's about what can be proven. And that's exactly where this story is heading next. Because if you thought the setup was intense, what comes after is even crazier. By the time the group left the studio, the scope of what had happened was staggering. But as methodical as it had been inside, the outside world was already watching. Today, digital footprints are the real witnesses, and the defendants reportedly left a trail that law enforcement could trace almost immediately. Surveillance cameras, cell phone pings, license plate readers, and even social media activity were all quietly recording each step. It started with an ankle monitor. Yes, the same one that had been strapped to the ringleader's leg as a condition of his supervised release from a previous federal sentence. The device had logged his exact movements in real time, placing him inside the studio at the moment everything allegedly occurred. The ankle monitor wasn't just a passive tool. It broadcasted coordinates to federal authorities, effectively mapping out every step of the operation. In one fell swoop, it rendered any hope of plausible deniability almost impossible. But that was only the beginning. Federal prosecutors also pieced together GPS data from the defendants' cell phones. These pings confirmed that multiple individuals had traveled from Memphis, Tennessee to Dallas, Texas, arriving within the narrow window that made this operation possible. Rental car records showed that the father of the alleged ringleader had booked the SUV used to transport the crew. He allegedly coordinated the logistics, providing vehicles and direction, effectively becoming a co-conspirator in a crime that investigators say was orchestrated down to the minute. Inside the studio, the operation unfolded with precision. Victims were separated, contracts were presented at gunpoint, and compliance was enforced under threat of deadly force. The alleged ringleader, along with 8 others, carried out roles with military-like organization. One person controlled the victims, another documented the coercion on video, while others collected valuables. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy. Rolexes, jewelry, cash, designer bags, and even earrings were reportedly seized, with at least one victim physically assaulted. Fingerprints left at the scene corroborated the presence of specific individuals. Surveillance footage from multiple angles, from the studio itself to nearby businesses, created a multi-layered visual record of the alleged crimes. The federal criminal complaint paints a picture of methodical violence. The group allegedly manipulated the circumstances so every victim's choice was removed, turning what might have been an ordinary negotiation into a high-stakes, armed robbery. One victim was choked to near unconsciousness. Another was forced to comply while under the direct threat of a firearm. These weren't impulsive acts, they were calculated moves in a pre-planned operation, executed with precision. And yet, the public reaction quickly shifted to one familiar question in hip-hop circles: who snitched? In the social sphere, speculation ran rampant, amplified by live streams, podcasts, and posts that dissected every possible source of information. Some alleged that one of the victims, a high-profile rapper, had cooperated with authorities by identifying key participants. While the legal system clearly differentiates between victims providing testimony and criminal cooperation, in the court of public opinion, the distinction often gets lost. Adding another layer of complexity, accusations emerged that the father and son at the center of this operation had a history with federal cooperation. Documents allegedly surfaced suggesting prior arrangements, though these remain unverified in mainstream reporting. Legal experts caution that until official federal disclosures confirm such agreements, these claims remain allegations. Nonetheless, in a narrative already steeped in drama, the implications were explosive. The irony of the situation cannot be overstated. Earlier in the year, the alleged ringleader had publicly praised one of the victims as a blueprint for post-prison success, a model for how to rehabilitate, stay disciplined, and avoid returning to prison. That admiration, voiced in interviews, became a striking counterpoint to the violent acts that allegedly followed months later. In essence, he was accused of replicating the very mistakes he had publicly condemned, creating a narrative that reads like a tragic script, complete with irony, betrayal, and a cautionary moral. As the evidence stacked up, authorities coordinated raids to secure additional proof. Searches of residences yielded digital devices, paper records, and other items that could further substantiate federal charges. Every aspect of the defendant's actions, from travel to communication, left traces that investigators meticulously documented. The case grew into a multi-defendant, multi-jurisdictional federal investigation, combining traditional forensic evidence with modern digital tracking. The legal stakes are severe. Each defendant faces potential life sentences under federal kidnapping statutes, compounded for some by the fact that they were allegedly still under supervised release from prior convictions. Courts treat such violations as particularly egregious, signaling not only the seriousness of the current charges, but also a disregard for previously imposed federal supervision. Meanwhile, the narrative online continued to evolve. Influencers and commentators dissected the story, sharing clips, screenshots, and alleged documents in real time. Some fueled speculation about cooperation and betrayal, while others analyzed the procedural details, questioning how such a highly organized operation could unfold under the watchful eye of federal monitoring. In both legal and social contexts, this case became a study in the intersection of crime, celebrity, and digital evidence. From a procedural standpoint, the defendant's alleged actions illustrate a key principle in federal law: planning, coordination, and intent can elevate criminal liability. By structuring the operation with clear roles, by separating victims, and by executing the plan across state lines, the prosecution may argue the case rises from robbery to conspiracy, kidnapping, and multiple firearms violations. Each piece of evidence, from the ankle monitor to surveillance video, is a potential building block in constructing a narrative of premeditation and criminal intent. Despite the shock value of the story, experts note that the case remains in its early stages. The unsealing of the criminal complaint is just the first step. Defendants are presumed innocent, and pretrial proceedings, motions, and hearings will take months to resolve. Complex federal cases, particularly those involving multiple jurisdictions, can take a year or more to reach trial. Meanwhile, the evidence collected by investigators ensures the prosecution has a robust foundation to support its claims. The saga underscores several lessons. First, that meticulous planning does not guarantee secrecy. Second, that modern technology, tracking devices, cell phone data, surveillance cameras, can make even the most carefully orchestrated operations traceable. And third, that public figures are scrutinized both legally and socially in ways that amplify every misstep. The alleged father-son involvement adds a layer of generational complexity, highlighting how influence, legacy, and family dynamics intersect with the law in high-profile cases. In sum, what began as a business meeting allegedly orchestrated by a rising hip-hop artist escalated into a coordinated armed robbery involving 9 individuals, federal supervision violations, and intense scrutiny from law enforcement and the public alike. Evidence spans digital tracking, surveillance footage, forensic data, and victim testimony. Allegations of prior cooperation add further intrigue, while the irony of the ringleader's earlier statements about discipline and success paints a tragic portrait of ambition gone awry. As investigators continue to build the case, the spotlight remains firmly on the father and son duo at the center, both facing the possibility of lengthy federal sentences. For observers, the story is a cautionary tale about the intersection of fame, criminal behavior, and the consequences of actions in a world where every step is increasingly visible. And while the full narrative will unfold in federal court, the events of January 10, 2026, and the evidence collected thereafter have already cemented this incident as one of the most remarkable and widely discussed cases in recent hip-hop history. After the Dallas studio incident, the scope of the fallout became impossible to ignore. News spread like wildfire across social media, with clips, screenshots, and alleged court documents circulating faster than traditional media could verify them. Every angle of the story seemed to have a public audience, from hip-hop fans dissecting the drama to legal analysts breaking down the federal complaint. And at the center of it all were 2 names: the alleged ringleader, Lantrell Williams Jr., better known in the streets as Pooh Shiesty, and his father, Lantrell Williams Sr., also called Mob Boss. Both father and son were now facing the full weight of federal prosecution. According to the criminal complaint, each defendant could face life in prison under federal kidnapping statutes. The aggravating factor that prosecutors are expected to emphasize is the supervised release violation. The ringleader allegedly committed the Dallas studio incident while still under federal supervision for a previous firearms conviction. That means his prior time in prison, 3 years of a 63-month sentence, didn't deter him from stepping back into a high-risk criminal scenario. Judges typically view such actions as indicative of a lack of rehabilitation, and it can dramatically influence sentencing guidelines. But beyond the courtroom implications, the story also exposed the extent of planning and coordination required to execute the alleged crime. Investigators pieced together movements across cities, vehicle rentals, surveillance camera footage, fingerprints, social media activity, and even Greyhound bus records documenting the alleged crew's return to Memphis. The level of organization indicated that this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment crime. This was a premeditated operation. Prosecutors could argue that every action, who held the gun, who documented the forced contract signing, who controlled the victims, was intentional and deliberate. And then there was the digital footprint, the ankle monitor that logged the ringleader's presence in real time, the cell phone pings confirming movements, the license plate readers tracking vehicles. These were not circumstantial pieces of evidence. They were exact, time-stamped data points showing presence, coordination, and intent. In federal cases, especially involving multiple defendants, digital tracking can be devastatingly effective in establishing the prosecution's narrative. At the same time, the story reignited debates about cooperation and betrayal in hip-hop circles. Allegations emerged suggesting prior cooperation with federal authorities by both the father and the son, dating back to cases in 2009 and 2022, respectively. While these claims remain unverified in mainstream reporting, the mere suggestion added a layer of intrigue and public speculation that fueled viral conversation. Comments from industry figures, live streams, and social media discussions amplified the narrative, regardless of verification. The irony in this saga is palpable. Just months prior, the alleged ringleader had publicly praised one of his victims, Gucci Mane, as a blueprint for post-prison success, someone who had transformed his life through discipline, focus, and strategic decision-making. Yet, he allegedly walked into the same man's studio, pistol in hand, to force compliance with a contract dispute. The juxtaposition of admiration and violent action illustrates a dramatic contradiction. The lessons he publicly endorsed were seemingly ignored in his real-world decisions. In terms of the criminal case, multiple angles are already evident. The federal complaint alleges conspiracy, armed robbery, kidnapping, and firearms violations. Each defendant's role is detailed with specificity: who brought weapons, who controlled the victims, who documented the coercion, and who managed logistics like transportation and studio bookings. The alleged father, Lantrell Williams Sr., is accused not only of being present during the incident, but also of renting the vehicle used to transport the crew, coordinating with the studio, and reviewing documents forced at gunpoint. If proven, these actions position him as a co-conspirator rather than a passive observer. Meanwhile, the victims' testimonies, combined with physical evidence, create a multi-layered case. Surveillance footage from the studio and surrounding areas corroborates the timeline. Fingerprints tie specific individuals to key locations, and social media posts from the defendants themselves flaunting stolen items add another layer of proof. Even the return trip home via Greyhound is documented, creating a chain of evidence linking the defendants from departure to execution to retreat. As of now, no trial date has been set. Pre-trial hearings, motions, and potential plea negotiations could unfold over the next year, given the case's complexity and the number of defendants involved. Federal cases of this magnitude often take months to progress, particularly when multiple jurisdictions and high-profile defendants are involved. The evidence, however, is already substantial, and prosecutors are expected to use every detail to paint a picture of organized, premeditated criminal conduct. The public response continues to swirl around two key themes: accountability and spectacle. Fans of hip-hop, casual observers, and industry insiders alike are dissecting every element of the story, from the alleged betrayal by the father and son to the audacity of committing a high-profile armed robbery under federal supervision. Social media serves both as a source of news and a magnifier of public opinion, and in cases like this, perception can influence both reputations and narratives. Yet, amid the controversy, the core legal reality remains unchanged. All defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Allegations, social media speculation, and viral clips may shape public perception, but the judicial process will ultimately determine outcomes. Evidence, testimony, and cross-examination will form the foundation of the trial, and federal judges and prosecutors will apply the law to establish accountability. Looking at the broader implications, this case highlights the intersection of crime, technology, and fame. An ankle monitor, cell phone data, license plate readers, and surveillance cameras all play critical roles in building federal cases, demonstrating how modern technology can leave an indelible trail. The alleged coordination across state lines, coupled with documented logistics, also illustrates the increased scrutiny high-profile figures face when engaging in criminal activity. The narrative also serves as a cautionary tale about choices, mindset, and consequences. Even after experiencing prison and supervised release, the alleged ringleader allegedly chose a path that led directly back to federal custody. The stakes were not hypothetical. The consequences included life-changing criminal charges, potential life sentences, and the permanent tarnishing of both personal and professional reputation. Ultimately, the story of the Dallas studio incident, the alleged armed robbery, and the father-son dynamic is one of ambition, audacity, and the perils of underestimating the legal system. While social media buzz and public debate continue, the judicial process will slowly unfold, documenting the evidence, examining witness testimony, and weighing the credibility of every claim. Every piece of digital data, every fingerprint, every contract coerced under threat will be scrutinized in court. And so, as the legal machinery grinds forward, the public remains captivated. Every twist, allegation, and confirmation is dissected, creating a narrative that transcends the ordinary scope of criminal cases. For now, the father and son remain in custody, both facing the consequences of choices that allegedly turned a promising comeback into one of the most widely discussed federal cases in recent hip-hop history. The only certainty is that this story is far from over. The courtroom will tell the final chapters, and the consequences will be severe. Meanwhile, the lessons are clear. Even fame, wealth, and opportunity cannot insulate one from accountability. Decisions, particularly those made under the shadow of the law, carry weight, and the consequences ripple far beyond the immediate moment.